everyone, and welcome to WREVA's Electrifying News for November of 2024. With me, as always, I have Mr. Eric Stevens joining us from the faraway, Monterrey area of Mexico. How are you today, Eric?
I'm doing pretty good, Mark. It's National Revolution Day here. We had a holiday here in Mexico, but we were paying our employees good overtime to come in and make lots of good stuff today. So
excellent.
I'm busy down here working, but the weather is beautiful, nice 31 degrees Celsius and sunny, so I can't complain about that at all. So
I guess not. You're not going to get any sympathy from us getting a 12-degree high day here, so no sympathy. Also with us as normal, we have Mr. Ian is with us from downtown Kitchener. How are you? A little closer. How are you today, sir?
Pretty good. I'm just waiting to see if we start singing, talking about the revolution, senor. It's an interesting holiday with Mexico.
Yeah.
On that, yeah, they have some great stuff. Like we just had Day of the Dead, Dias de Muertos, I think is how you say it. And of course, they have the Independence Day, I think, in September. And yeah, they got some great holidays. It all involves tequila. It's all good.
All right. Well, Ian, let's load the deck and get going because we got a lot of news to hit this month.
Yeah. All right. So the first news that we're showing are EV owners really happy?
Yes.
And the verdict, yeah, pretty overwhelming, yes. Now, this is a 2023 survey that over 90% of EV drivers are happy with their choice and would likely buy an EV again. Now, the downsides I find interesting. Again, this is from 2023. It was interesting. It kind of popped up lately on my news feed. And maybe just like a little bit of an update. The downside, of course, is the upfront cost of the EV, which, I think that's changing a little bit over time as well. And then the fill up a gas tank in minutes. I quoted minutes because my argument's always been is like, it's not minutes. If you're paying 7 to 10 times more for that fuel, you got to work or something to pay for that fuel. So, if we're the average Joe that's working, then yeah, you're going to be working more for that. But the range roulette, I've never heard that term before, which is basically you're getting on the low end and you're like, well, the next charger is X amount of kilometers or miles away. And are you going to, get there in time? And then, of course, the range anxiety aspect of things. But I think all those things now are not anywhere the same fear factor. There is a bit of a general public kind of aspect of that fear, but majority of people who are actual EV owners, I don't think this is a big deal for them. They figured it out, and I would say our, group of Waterloo Region electric vehicle owners, I would say we're well over 90% of owners that are happy. So.
Yeah, I would agree with that sentiment. I know that I've had informal surveys talking with groups of people, and you're hard pressed to find somebody that would said they would go back to gas after owning an EV for a period of time. Because yes, there is a adjustment period. If you're coming from a gas vehicle to an EV, there's an adjustment period, but it's relatively short. If you've done your homework, if you've talked to other EV owners, it's relatively painless as well, because a lot of people have already lived it and understand where some of the pitfalls may exist if you don't expect them. So being able to be aware is certainly part of the homework, and having that down pat, most, if not almost all, people seem to be happy with the choice they've made. And yes, in our group here in Waterloo Region, vast majority would agree with this, that they would buy another EV next time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd even argue, looking at the article, it does mention some what they call occasional downsides. And one of the things I find too is, most of those occasional downsides are mostly learning curve. people getting the initial ownership. And then, once you learn the vehicle and learn the infrastructure and learn that, once you get past that learning period, then, all of a sudden, most of those downsides start to fade away or even go away completely. So,
yeah. And the downsides too, there's always the counter argument. So when you say about the upfront cost, well, okay, there's an upfront cost. Maybe it depends on what you're looking at, number one. And then number two is like the next statement of fill up a gas tank in minutes. But that fill up a gas tank in minutes is also costing you easily 7-8 times more. So the upfront cost, where's that savings in your gas vehicle if you're just, and it's funny, on our Facebook group today, somebody just posted about their girlfriend who charges in public chargers, lives in an apartment, and went from like $50-$60 a week with gas to $50-$60 a month in charging, and actually finding it, ultra convenient overall. So yeah, it's, it comes to that, you got to live it to kind of understand it. And, I don't really, even the range anxiety, I don't know that I kind of buy into a lot of that anymore either. So anyways, let's move on. And this is an interesting article, and man, it's, it kind of puts a lot of perspective in terms of Canada in comparison to, China, for that matter, and the EVs that they are putting together. Yeah, it's and it was nice to see also there's some commentary from Tim Burrows from the EV Society as well, which, he had some good input on that as well.
Yeah, so I'm not seeing the slide change. I don't know if you're seeing it. Oh, now it is. I see it. Okay.
Okay.
So this is an article that came out this past week. They wanted to address some of the issues that may arise with the tariff on Chinese EVs that has been placed by Canada on the people that are not building EVs inside a free trade country that is connected with Canada. And of course, China is really square in the crosshairs of this, because they are somebody that has been working on the EV movement now for 15 years internally. And with their style of government, they've been able to push the EV narrative forward with everybody, and push the society to purchase EVs in mass. And they've been doing a fantastic job doing this. And they've gotten through a lot of the hurdles in the early days that North Americans are starting to face now. We've got, obviously, the big three here in North America have been starting their EV runs, and they've started to run into some issues. They've noticed high prices of batteries. They've noticed that they don't have cars that they can get the price down as low as they would like it for more acceptance to the population. But again, these are groups that are just doing their first or second iteration of EVs now, and they have to run through a few cycles. The Chinese, with 15 years head start, because they understood what was going on and they directed everybody to follow that way, are far out ahead. And with that, they're able to reduce their costs dramatically for the cost of EVs. And of course, the cost of selling them to individual consumers has dropped as well. And that's fantastic. A lot of people can then afford the car. It moves more people into an EV faster. And it's a positive thing. But we have to also look at what we're trying to do in North America. Is we're trying to keep some of the jobs on this side of the equation. We're trying to employ Canadians. We're trying to employ Canadian businesses, and we're trying to use Canadian raw materials into this scenario so that everyone in the country can benefit. And of course, we have higher prices. So when the car actually comes to selling, we're looking at a much higher price than what you could get for a comparable vehicle in China. Again, skipping what the safety margins are, what they have to follow compared to what they do in North America. There's different standards. So we're not really comparing complete apples to apples here. It's a little bit skewed. But this article wanted to just alert people that there are things that we may give up, and a lot of it's centered on the price of the start of the vehicle. So that's what they're looking at. They're looking at a car that here from a Chinese company may cost in the area of, say, $24,000 compared to a $50,000 Canadian vehicle or American vehicle, someone part of the free trade agreement. So I know what we're trying to do, and I think I agree with that more than having a cheap EV. I'd rather see the infrastructure that we started to put in place here, just even in Ontario, moving that forward, as opposed to just having a cheap price up front and get none of the benefits of being able to source the materials locally, to put it together locally, and to sell it locally as well. I think those kind of outweigh what this article is talking about, but I did want to bring up the article so people could read about it themselves and understand both sides of the coin here.
Yeah, this is a complicated subject, I think, because part of it is the North American manufacturers took a little, as you mentioned, Mark. The Chinese manufacturers had a 15-year head start, and that certainly had a big deal. But part of it is, there's a certain amount of supply chain that's been built out in North America, and so what happened is all the North American manufacturers decided to, I would call it, take the Tesla approach, which is they focused on, I've got X amount of capacity. I can build X number of vehicles. So I'm going to take those vehicles. I'm going to focus on the high margin, expensive vehicles first. And they didn't emphasize the low cost vehicles. Now, the challenge with that is, of course, the supply chain is building out today. Manufacturers are building, battery plants are going up like crazy, and infrastructure is going in like crazy to support building more EVs. And so as the scale comes up, production comes down. But the Chinese manufacturers have already had the ability to scale, and they've been able to scale with a lot of support from their government. So the Chinese government has heavily supported that scaling of production and allowed that scaling to happen much faster than they can happen naturally here under economic conditions here in North America. So that's part of the reason why the Chinese are where they are today, because the government just poured money into it and gave them the head start they needed to scale their production much faster. Now, interesting enough, we talk about comparable EVs and stuff like that. I actually took a look at one of my close colleagues who works in the Philippines. He's actually just purchased a BYD Seagull. Actually, he's going to be taking delivery of it in a couple of weeks. So that'll be pretty interesting. But he sent me the price list for his vehicles in the Philippines, and I saw one that was, BYD makes an SUV that's very comparable to my Blazer EV. And when I took a look at it, it wasn't cheaper than my Blazer EV. It was actually about 10% more expensive than my Blazer EV. So it's one of those things where comparable vehicles, I'm not necessarily sure that they would be cheaper. People see some of these cheaper EVs, but they're also getting a lot less for it. A BYD Seagull is a much smaller, much more compact vehicle than other vehicles that are on the market here today. And the Toronto Star article shows it as $17,000. But if you actually imported that vehicle into North America, it would not be a $17,000 vehicle anymore. It would be well into, probably closer to upper 20s by that point. By the time you get your distribution charges and everything marked up onto it, that's even without the tariffs. So, the situation's a lot more complicated than most people think. But that being said, the North American manufacturers are paying attention right now. If you've looked at the interviews from people like Farley from Ford and their secret project that they have going on, which is their new low-cost, mid-sized electric pickup truck, which I'm kind of really looking forward to seeing what comes out of that. Or even General Motors, which is rebooting the Bolt EV next year with a lithium iron phosphate battery. That vehicle is probably going to be priced, closer to $30,000 in Canada. So, it's one of those things where the tariff is. I don't like how the tariff was applied. I think there was a smarter way to do it. But that being said, I can kind of see why they did it. Hopefully, it's just temporary. And even here in Mexico right now, I've personally seen 2 BYD vehicles, including a BYD Seagull on the road here. So BYD and the Chinese manufacturers are very strong. In fact, one of our manufacturing engineers that I'm with right now, he's driving a Chinese-made. It's a gas vehicle, but it's a Chinese-made car as well too. So the Chinese are very strongly going into Mexico right now. So definitely seeing that. And even the last time I was here in Mexico 7 months ago, and just in that 7 months, I've seen the market share of Chinese vehicles greatly increase here in Mexico.
And then we get the other thing is that a lot of things are still in flux. We've got a new administration taking hold in the United States, and there's rumblings there about slashing the EV credit that has been brought, the federal credit for Americans. And that may upset some apple carts as well, as companies have grown EV programs to depend on that as they're rolling it out. Being taken away from manufacturers would be an unpleasant surprise for most as well. So there's a lot of things that are still up in the air, including tariffs.
Yeah, I think to sum up this article is just kind of your last point, up in the air. Everything from government aspect of things, the trade aspect of things, and then of course the legacy auto, what Ford is doing, what GM is doing, and really I don't think we're going to really know much until next year kind of comes about with all of this. But it's interesting times with and of course with Canada, how we're being impacted by all of this as well. So I don't know, maybe we'll have to open up a used Chinese Mexican car market called Chexican or something. I'm actually, Eric, one quick question. Your friend with the Seagull, sorry, he's in Canada that he's getting delivered, or is he in Philippines?
Manila, yeah.
He's in Manila that he's doing this, yeah, okay, yeah. But, and speaking of BYD as well, and of course, my connection with Mexico, I am seeing, I'm not sure if it's open, I think it might be, but BYD is definitely opening some shops in Mexico, and I think Puerto Vallarta, it's open now. Because if you go on Facebook Marketplace, I'm even seeing there, just for the heck of it, I typed in BYD and I'm seeing the EV aspect of it in Facebook Marketplace for Mexico. So it's happening.
I've seen at least 3 on the road here in Monterey. So
yeah, interesting. Yeah. Well, all right. From the Chinese EV tariffs to something a little more fun. School buses with solar.
Yeah, so this is I thought this was kind of interesting. So in the past shows we've talked about how school buses might make a great opportunity because they sit quite a bit during the day, so that they have this battery that's sitting there and they can be plugged in for good portions of the day where you could potentially be charging and discharging them from a vehicle to grid and grid stability standpoint. Well, here we've got a company that's kind of doing that, and then with a little added twist on top of that, where they're adding solar panels on the top of the buses as well too. So they're basically like stationary / mobile power generators as well too, which I thought was kind of interesting. So this company in Brooklyn is got a dozen of these school buses, and they apparently have a pretty innovative little solution for pairing them in a vehicle to grid setup. So I thought this was a neat setup.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's it's a kind of an extension of what our friend Ian has done with his boat.
Yeah.
We heard many people about electrifying their boats by putting a battery pack in the boat, but Ian took it one step further and made the awning above the boat solar canopy. So not only does it have the battery, but when you're tooling around the lake, the boat can collect energy from the sun stored in the same battery pack and extend your range for the vehicle. So this seems that they've taken a page right out of your book, Ian.
I
Yeah,
should, when I dock the boat on the mainland, I should actually get Hydro to hook me up so I can do net metering with the boat into the grid, and then I could put a charger there. There you
Yeah.
go. There's a good
And then-
idea.
And then when you bring it to your cottage, you could hook it up there and you could have it as a secondary power source for your house as well too.
I looked at, it's funny you mentioned, because I did look at that as well, but the cable length became a bit of a, question. But mind you, if we convert it to AC, who knows? Maybe it might be another possibility in that respect. The one thing with these school buses, and to your point, Eric, about, a lot of cases they're just sitting there, and really, when you think about our vehicles and how often, we use our vehicles and how often they just sit there as well, and they're, here's a roof surface that could also charge up the vehicle's battery, but what's to say you couldn't, then keep plugging it into your home for the, its aspects of things as well. But it's almost like a little mini micro system, if you want to call it that. And I think, as we start learning more with these type of devices, and also getting data, what do one of these school buses in a day produce power wise on a good day? Not only charging up, say, the battery and stuff like this, but also putting to the grid. And then we start realizing the potential of, this square footage per bus. I think there's some really interesting data to be collected there that might, incentivize more bus companies to consider something like this as well. So, all right. From the school bus to some more battery recycling news. So I love these articles, and especially too when it comes from some major companies that everyone recognizes, like Mercedes-Benz. And of course, we always get the person who's like, yeah, what do you do with the batteries when they're done? And, yada, yada. And so now, it's getting to the point where which of X amount of companies would you like to name off that are recycling the batteries? And of course, now hearing that Mercedes-Benz is now doing this as well with their own plant. And for them, like they say, it was a no-brainer to consider this aspect of this. Altiliums, I think is how you say it, as a UK-based company. And again, a lot of cases, we're not seeing recovery of less than 95%. In most cases, are 98%. And I find it interesting when they say from 150,000 EVs per year, because we're not really seeing those EVs, unless they've been in accidents, we're not really seeing them come off the road the same way either. But yeah, it's it's great to see that this is a solution, and it just basically means over time, I think that the mining aspect for the batteries is probably going to decline somewhat as we start doing that transition to more people having electric vehicles.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is all about, the circular economy, basically. And, I keep always telling people you can't recycle gasoline, right?
No.
Once you burn it, it's pretty much gone. Here, now we've got a situation where you make these cars. Yes, EVs take a little bit more resources up front to make. But what's beautiful about that is obviously the energy savings, play a huge role into recouping that very quickly. But then on top of that, they can be recycled, broken down to make new EVs in the future. And you get that circular economy. We look at the capacities here of 150,000 EVs a year. That doesn't sound like a lot, and it's probably not a lot right now, because right now there hasn't been, most EVs will survive on the market for 15 years. So if you go back 15 years ago, there wasn't a lot of EVs being produced at that time. So seeing this capacity come online is good today, but and over the next 5 to 10 years, obviously that capacity is going to have to ramp up significantly to probably meet the demand. But this is a great place to start, to show that, hey, we're starting this. We're putting the infrastructure in place to make this a truly circular economy and make this sustainable. And before, the whole big thing is 80% of the copper in the world was recycled. Most of it didn't come from mining. And I think we're going to see that with battery tech going forward as well too, and cars going forward. We're probably going to see, in another 10 or 15 years, we're probably going to see that 80% of the cars coming off the road is using recycled materials, and not so much mining materials as well too, and mining resources. So EVs will just become more and more sustainable in the future once we scale up and create that circular system.
Yeah, and as Ian has mentioned, this just becomes another in a long list of companies that are getting involved with this. And it's good to see the manufacturers are actually putting their stakes in the ground now as well, because obviously they're seeing that they expect they'll be making EVs into the future. They expect that that's going to be something they will be doing, and therefore they're going to need more and more batteries. And why not collect some of those recycled batteries, refine them yourselves, put them into your own chemistry, and reship them to your factories, and save yourself some money in the process. So it's good to see that Mercedes sees this going forward as something that will continue, and now they're starting to put some capital into the system because they know it's going to be part of their future, which is great to see.
It's interesting. Like, we talk a lot about the battery recycling, but the other aspect of this, of course, we hear the arguments is about the solar, and for that matter, even wind. For a while there was questionable about the recyclability of wind, but the Canadian company Vespa actually is doing that, and same percentage, 95%. But the solar, I'm seeing a lot more companies that are showing that they also can recycle solar panels very easily, and make better solar panels out of the material, in terms of efficiency and all that too. So it's this circular positive loop economy for this, which is not only beneficial, I think, for the companies, but when you look at our environmental aspect, is very beneficial as well. So. Absolutely. All right. Now, talking about production with EVs and batteries, NextStar is an interesting company here.
Yeah, so NextStar, of course, is connected with Stellantis. There's a plant that's being built, a couple of plants actually being built in Windsor area. NextStar is putting together battery packs, and this article wanted to come out and talk a little bit about the administration change in the United States that we know is happening in 2 months. And there's been, I guess, people are unsure about these new plants starting up with this wild card of a new administration. And they're wondering, are they going to start producing batteries? Well, NextStar has indicated that yes, we've built the plant, or we've almost built the plant completely, and we've hired workers. And right now, we're assembling battery packs from cells that are being shipped to us from overseas. We will be producing our own cells and putting them into packs as of this summer. And we're not deterred about the winds from Washington changing. We are going to go ahead and push through and start to move the product on the schedule that we had laid out for ourselves earlier in 2 years ago. So this is good news to see. Again, there is uncertainty in the EV market now when it comes to what Washington's doing because it's such a big part of the puzzle. But we've got this Windsor, Ontario factory has indicated that we see what's going on, and we believe EVs are still going to move forward, and they're going to require our batteries. And we're going to continue with it. So they're sticking the course. Again, my hat's off to them. I'm glad that they're starting to move forward with this, and I'm glad other EV manufacturing plants are still heading to the finish line to start producing themselves. So this is good news, and at this point, they're just sticking to their plans that they had already laid out.
Yeah, I agree, Mark. This is a great news. Not only that, but like just a little cherry on top there. Like these battery packs are not just coming out of this facility, but they're actually going into Canadian-made EVs. And now the Dodge Charger Daytona, which is rolling off the line out of Stellantis's Windsor assembly plant. So now we have another Canadian-made EV, and they're using Canadian-made battery packs. So that's a great thing to see as well too. And I'm happy to see that our local economy and the stuff is moving in that direction now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, again, it's going to be interesting as this all unfolds. I think it's still going to be a very good news story. And whether or not the administration south, it might impact certain things. I think everything is going forward with this. There's no question about it. And part of the reason of it going forward and has to go forward is China, Norway, more and more Europe is becoming, electrified with all this stuff. So I think there's always going to be jobs and a market for these type of companies, whether it's Stellantis or, they might expand out to other areas as well. We keep mentioning about electric vehicle aspect. There's also the whole home battery and, for that matter, grid aspect of these batteries. So a plant like this, I think, has got lots of opportunities. It's not just the electric vehicle aspect. And whether, down south, the uncertainty of what's going to be happening, I think overall it's still positive on this.
Yeah, so. That's a good point, Ian. The world is going electric with or without the U.S.
Yeah.
And basically, even here in Mexico, the price of gas I saw the other day was 24 pesos a liter, which is more expensive. It's $1.60 Canadian a liter, which is more expensive than it is in Canada.
Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of people even here in Mexico that are starting to question and go, hey, those BYDs are looking pretty good. Maybe I want to get an EV. So, and then as I mentioned, a colleague in the Philippines getting an EV as well too. The world is starting to move on with or without Donald Trump. And the other side I would say to this too is, this is part of the greater automotive ecosystem. The ecosystem between Ontario and the automotive industry in Ontario and the U.S. is so tightly integrated and so massive right now today that if Trump were to do anything drastic, it would literally kill a significant portion of the automotive industry. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things where he can't mess with this, or if he does, he's going to hurt a lot of Americans and Canadians in the process.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where this is going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting with Mexico, just last kind of quick point on that. Mexico has its own Pemex, which is government-owned oil company. So it's interesting that, the prices are what they are, what you're mentioning, because that's high. Like I'm used to 19 pesos. And now you're saying 24. So yeah, it's gone up. But the other thing about Mexico, of course, is like, it's sun and solar is taking off big time in Mexico. Even in my area, I see every time I go down, there's more and more installations happening. And I think when people realize like their car is being charged by this as part of this, it just becomes a no-brainer. So, all right. So, talking about the needing materials for the battery, this is where I saw another interesting article this week where the machines are EVs to mine for the machines that become EVs, and we're of course seeing this now. So,
yeah, so I love this because you go on some of the forums and the websites and social media today, and you see people pulling out, saying, hey, these are the vehicles that are mining your EVs, or how in the world is this ever going to go electric? Well, here we are. Caterpillar has pulled out a version of one of its larger dump trucks here that is electric, and they're starting to roll out with a bunch of a dozen or so customers. These what they call early learner battery electric trucks, basically, and they've got a set of customers. Basically, they're going to be running these trucks so that they can learn and evolve based upon that. So it's pretty interesting how they do this. They actually ship them to the sites disassembled, and then they have to assemble them on site. So they have these special crews that assemble them on site. It's pretty neat. But these trucks are just absolutely massive. And I don't have details on like the battery packs. I was trying to find some information on it, but I do know that these things run at about 2,000 kilowatt is the power of the motors, which is roughly around 3,000 horsepower. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So
what's the 0 to 60 on these things? Oh man.
It is interesting though, Eric, is that some people don't realize that a lot of the high torque vehicles out there are already electric anyways. You look at the freight trains that run the rails in Canada and the United States. They're electrically powered. It's just that they have a diesel generator that produces the electricity to run to the electric motors. So electric for big heavy machines is already a proven factor. This is just starting to break into the I guess the traditional areas that gasoline thought it was king. But really, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to change over to electric relatively quickly, since the EV adoption when it comes to small cars has kind of paved the way. And this is great news to see.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, like, again, this mining aspect of things. I've been hearing, Cambrian College up in Sudbury of course, has a whole new section with mining, but with electric aspect to it. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily mean that it's being used with batteries. It's actually tethered by cable. With the electrical aspect of it, and in that case, it makes way more sense than putting the battery part of it into it. But and of course, we've talked about this as well. Is that I can't remember if it's Sweden or Switzerland, but a very similar type of vehicle like this, where it climbs to the top of the hill, gets filled up, goes down the hill, recharges enough that it completely fully recharges itself when it goes downhill to go back up the hill. It literally becomes a perpetual motion machine, which is, something does that actually exist? In this case, it kind of does, but
it's not perpetual motion. I'll just correct you there, Ian, but basically what you're doing is you're taking the extra weight of the potential energy at the top and converting that to energy at the bottom of the hill. So and then you dump that weight, so you're lighter going back up. So
that's true. Okay.
So you're still energy negative, but some of that energy is just weight you're pulling down the hill. So
something. Yeah, okay, that makes some more sense than that. Yeah, it's still interesting that you don't need to charge this thing up. You charge it up with the extra weight.
Yes,
whatever that is.
You're using that the resistance of hauling that weight down the hill is creating that extra amount of regenerative energy. So
unfortunately, the extra weight I feel after a meal doesn't seem to give me that extra energy when I go walking down the hill. It's pretty much done.
Yeah.
All right. So this just came out in the last week. I came across this. There's a YouTuber that I watch, the Electric Viking, and he's an Australian man, and he, he's got some interesting stuff he keeps up to date on, and he was talking recently in Australia at a electric vehicle convention, and the government there has now talked about by the end of this year, they're going to allow EV owners to begin using this vehicle to grid technology and like make it like a new standard. And so companies can also apply to have their bidirectional aspect of things tested, make sure it's compliant, and then can be applied then that part of it for the grid as well. So interesting enough, you get chatting with people and I get somebody who goes, yeah, they're going to take down the grid. And it's like, no, they're actually part of the grid, especially when it comes to peak power. You're going to eventually have enough people with all these, huge battery packs with lots of kilowatts in their driveway that you can then access to. And Australia seems to be moving forward with this a lot quicker as well.
Yeah, I think that's something that most EV economies are going to be adopting over time. I think that's the next step to be able to create more of a circle type economy for EVs. And we haven't seen a great deal of it in Canada at this point. There is some of it. It is available on certain vehicles. You can do it. But I think it's going to play a bigger and bigger role as time goes along and more EVs are added to the marketplace. I think this is our future as well, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think the side of it that people don't always understand is just having the standards and the procedures and the processes involved to make sure that things are interconnected in the grid properly. A lot of people think, oh, just plug it into the grid, it'll be fine. But the grid is rather complex. And so when you start generating multiple sources of energy and pulling multiple sources of energy off of the grid, you have to make sure, if you're doing onesie twosies there, it's not a big deal. But if you get 1,000 people plugging into the grid, now all of a sudden it gets quite complicated and there's potential issues there. So you have to have the right understanding and the right systems in place to mitigate that and drive that. So that's part of what this is. And even when I read this article from Australia, it talked about how they've put the standards in place now and they've run some pilot projects and they have some understandings. So now it's just a matter of starting to implement that and work that in. So it's talking about over the next year, you're going to start to see more of this as they start permitting and they start regulating and inputting this in. And obviously there's going to be a lot of eyes watching this. I know it's been happening in Europe to some extent. It's now happening in Australia. So there's going to be a lot of eyes watching this to see how these systems become integrated. And we'll be learning from those, obviously, and hopefully integrating those learnings into our systems as well, too.
Yeah. When you mentioned about Europe, I think it was in the last year or two that the Netherlands was doing a similar project, but it was within a neighborhood and it was more involving Nissan Leafs for some particular reason. I think the technology was kind of easier that respect to kind of implement it, but they were doing a lot of testing with that as well. But I mean, again, to me, it becomes a lot of sense with all of this to, all of us, not just taking from the grid, but being able to help the grid. And again, that comes back to, Eric, yourself and I, we have solar in our homes that always is feeding the grid to help keep the grid going as well. On a small scale, mind you, we get that. But I think the cars, as they grow over time, it will be very much a similar aspect of things as well. And, the other thing that people, I think, need to kind of look at is that those demands are during what time periods. And in a lot of cases, it's summer, lots of AC being run. But also, as we switch to air source heat pumps, if we get some ultra cold winters, that might also be the next sort of part of it where we need to kind of see some of this implemented as well. I don't think that's a perspective that's put into place because most cases we think winter, we think natural gas, furnace. But as the heat pumps, more and more of them become online, this becomes another aspect of things that becomes important to understand as well. So,
yeah.
All righty. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now this one, okay. I'm gonna, let Mark talk about this first, but I'm curious on this one because having been a landlord for 19 years, in all the years, I never had a tenant who wanted EV charging. Not that it wasn't thought about, but I find this was kind of an interesting article. I'm not sure I'm on the side of the landlord in this case. I actually am more on the side of the tenant, and I kind of feel like the landlord, his counter offer was getting pretty greedy.
Well, this is brought this story to people's attention just because these type of scenarios are starting to happen all across
Mhm.
Canada.
Yep.
You've got people now that are purchasing EVs. They've done their homework. They believe that they can charge their vehicle reliably and start to implement that. This gentleman in Ottawa, he's run into some problems with his landlord over EV charging. And I can't say I completely agree with either party when it comes to what was relayed in this particular article. Um, I didn't bring this to, just to pick on this gentleman, but I did want to bring it to everyone's attention that, again, if you're getting into an EV for the first time, understand what homework you have to do. And one of the key factors is how are you going to charge your car overnight? Because off-peak power is the cheapest you can get here in Ontario. And that is what you should try to fill your car up with every time that you have a chance to do so.
Mhm.
This gentleman had he's renting an apartment or a townhome, I'm not sure which, and he's got a deal that all the electricity is included in his rent. So he pays a flat rent fee, and that includes all his electricity. Now, I can almost guarantee that the landlord was not expecting that his tenant would plug his car in and charge it up every night, although we know the cost of charging an EV is relatively low for us commuters. But who knows? Maybe this guy's running Uber during the evenings, and he's maxing out his electricity pull because he knows it's free, and it's a flat rate whether he pulls a little bit or a lot. So he is probably gaming the system somewhat, and the landlord is really unprepared to support this because he's probably unsure about what it's really costing him anyways. We know that if you drive your EV to and from work, most Canadians drive less than 30 kilometers a day. And that type of pulling from your apartment electricity bill, would probably equate to the price of a $2 coffee. Like, it is really not all that expensive. But again, if this guy is gaming the system and he's using his car to deliver food or on Skip or he's an Uber driver, then yeah, he's gaming the system a little bit. We're all going to have to work together going forward to I guess iron out these type of scenarios with people that are unfamiliar with EV adoption. And this is just one of these situations that was publicized by this particular news media about this gentleman saying that he's being treated unjustly, and of course the landlord is basically saying the same thing. There is going to be a common meeting of heads. And of course, maybe that's going to equate with, there's going to be no more included electricity with the rents. There's going to be metered amounts, and everyone's going to pay the share that they use. And of course, if there was a metered amount on this particular scenario, it would have taken care of the problem, I believe. But
Mhm.
these are new things that are starting to sprout up as more and more people go EV.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenging situation, and I mean, in some circumstances, you might have a multi-unit dwelling where installing multiple meters might be a challenge or quite a cost to do as well too. But I know there's a lot of apartments out there that if the electricity is included, and if you want to plug in an air conditioner, there's a surcharge that goes with that. And in some sense, this might have to get treated in a similar way, but that might have to be stipulated up front, or maybe it needs to be reworded that if you're using any high load electrical device that's being plugged in, such as an EV or an air conditioner or something like that, that you'll have to pay some X amount of surcharge on a monthly basis. And maybe that needs to be, maybe landlords need to start thinking about that in their contracts now. So
Hmm. It's the aspect of the metering is what kind of got me on this article, that, if a flat rate to me is never a good thing. I mean, to give another kind of an example, is like in my recording studio, occasionally I will get someone who say, can I do a flat rate for a song? And I always say, no, I charge by the hour, because if you decide that your song needs more, whatever, and I just charge you a flat rate, those, 2, 3 hours for a song is now turning into like 6, then who's actually winning on this whole aspect of things? And I think, to Mark's point too, there needs to be a meeting of the minds, and kind of like compromising on both sides to make this work and figure it out on this. The article was also bringing up the fact that there was, block heater plugs as well. But again, comes down to the metering aspect of all this. And I think that's the part, again, if there's no multiple meters for all the tenants and all the apartments, that gets to be an expense quite a bit as well on this. So, and it is, it's probably new territory for the landlord. This aspect as things. Thankfully, he's got a Leaf behind him, which doesn't have a lot of range to, like, it's not like he's bringing a Hummer EV or a Cybertruck in there and saying like, yeah, so I want to charge this puppy up.
Yeah. And it probably depends on what kind of charging station he's hooking up to. If he's plugging in a level 1 charging station, then there's only so much power you can pull on a day. Versus a level.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and one quick other last point for myself, there was a talk show from Ottawa that I was listening to, and they were talking about, cost of living, carbon tax, and everything else. And I called in, and it was interesting because the host was like, well, I live in an apartment, and I can't get an EV, and I blah blah blah. I was like, but it was sort of like, well, wait a minute, you rent a house from your landlord. There's got to be most likely an outside plug that you could plug in 110 and work something. And if you're paying for your electricity, that case, like, it was just funny, the arguments that he was making to not go with an EV. And yet, and part of it was this, landlord aspect of things. So I don't know. Myself, when I was a landlord, if somebody came and they wanted to consider an EV, there was an outside 110 plug right by the driveway. And it was like, well, the meters are there. You do whatever you want. Just be safe about it with the cable. But it'll be interesting to see how, if, we get any updates on this article, if something, comes about with it. All right. When as soon as I saw this, the first thing I thought is this is like, again, another version of a Cybertruck Halo type of vehicle, and kind of like a combined in some respects, because there's definitely some different elements, put in with this. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is an interesting vehicle, and it's interesting on several fronts. This is basically an armored heavy-duty pickup truck. Basically, they took a Chevy Silverado 2500 HD a chassis, but basically what General Motors has done is they use the 12-module battery pack, which you'll find in like a Cadillac Lyriq, 102 kilowatt-hour battery pack, and then they've paired it with there is a diesel range extender in it. But one of the interesting parts is I've always there's always the saying in war, your soldiers and your weapons win battles, but logistics is what wins wars. And one of the biggest logistics challenges in a military conflict is how do you move fuel and stuff like that. So fuel is one of the biggest and hardest and major logistic challenges out there. And even, in the current, conflict in Ukraine right now, when the Russians did their initial advance, the very first things the Ukrainians went after was the Russian fuel trucks, because they knew that's what was going to stop them. And so today, the U.S. military is now looking for ways to divest themselves from consuming so much fuel. And part of that is electrification. So they are looking to electrify these vehicles to try to minimize how much fuel they need to ship around the world to get to zones and stuff like that from a logistics standpoint. And that's partially what these kind of vehicles are going after. So you're starting to see things like electric motorcycles being used by special forces, and you're starting to see electric dune buggies because, well, A, they're quiet, and B, they require less logistics and maintenance. And the same with the combat vehicles now too. They're starting to try to increase the level of electrification. Yeah, it has a diesel generator in case it needs that emergency backup to get somewhere. But they're quickly trying to find a way to divest themselves away from using and consuming as much fuel as possible with these things. So it's interesting that the defense industry is moving in that direction because they see that's the smart way to go for this, and we're seeing that here in this type of technology.
Yeah, it's again, it's a trend. More and more parts of the economy are switching over to electric, and defense is no different. And based on the examples that Eric has given us, certainly it's beneficial for them to divest as much away from fuel as they can, just for the logistics headache that it brings them. So, cutting 25% of it off or 50% of it off is going to allow them to move quicker and faster on the battlefield. So, not a big surprise that they're starting to examine what type of technologies they can employ to actually do that.
Mm-hmm. I think the part that I found interesting with the article was the aspect of quiet, sneaking up on your enemy, stealth, and of course, having run a diesel van. And I remember after a hockey game leaving, and one of the hockey players was in the parking lot, and I pulled my window down to say bye, and he goes, "Pardon, what? I can't hear you over the tank," and just because it's so loud, so. Yeah, I found it interesting with that. And I think also there's the efficiency aspect of all this, but the electric motors, the torque, there's so many aspects with the terrain, I think is going to be, different than what they're dealing with the normal vehicles. It's going to put it on a different level as well. And having maybe some of the controls, I could see this being a lot more advanced, even with the controls of the motors with the wheels. Like they would go another level up from what, an average person would use these vehicles for, even with, I think, off-roading. But it's war advances technology as much as we maybe don't like war. It does definitely advance technology. We've seen that now even with the drone aspect of things too.
Yep. One thing I'm curious about on this is I wonder if it has a pedestrian noisemaker, and does it have a little button in there saying tactical mode where it turns it off?
Oh man. Yeah. And what would the sound be of the noise that they would for the pedestrians,
Birds chirping, I'm sure.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Machine gun fire.
I was gonna say some machine gun fire. Yeah. That'll move them butts quick. Actually, it's funny. I showed a website with Rivian to my class today where they designed the sounds for the Rivian truck. And when you go to arm it, a lot of cases you hear that cheep cheep type of sound, or sometimes you get a horn. Rivian actually is a bird sound. And it was funny, they're in an area and you can hear the birds going. And the only way you knew that he was arming the car was the lights would flash, but you would hear the chirp, but it blended right in with all the other birds. So, you didn't really know. It was just part of the environment. So, all right. That brings us to our last slide. And this is a big one that just, been announced. And 1,300 new electric vehicle charging ports. And the part that I like about this is you're getting a lot more of the northern aspect, which I think needs to be, looked at, especially too for the northern areas, for wanting A, to get up there, but also B, to kind of, show those populations as well about the whole electrification of everything will make a big difference. this, is a good direction to see. The Indigenous community aspect of it as well was nice to see. And it makes sense where they're putting in a lot of these arenas, hospitals, parks, recreation centers. Um, if I'm traveling, in a lot of cases, parks and recreation centers will be a nice little spot. Maybe on the way you pick up some fast food somewhere and go to that park or recreation center to have your lunch as you're traveling. So nice nice to see that they're actually getting this going.
Yeah, this is a great, adding that infrastructure. And even to your point, Ian, you get always those naysayers that sit there and say, oh, great, I can own an EV and 99% it's fine, time it's fine. But then I've got my cousin that lives up north and I can't make it to his place or something like that. So you always get those people like that. So it's good to plug those gaps into the infrastructure and get people up there. Though there is one thing I did notice. I did look at the 270 sites across the province. And I didn't see any in Espanola, and I didn't see any on Manitoulin Island, unfortunately. So
yeah, that'd be something that maybe I should send a little email out. It's like, hey, yeah, you guys are, especially with Manitoulin Island, that's a major tourist destination, and we have 2 chargers in Little Current, and then 1 in Gore Bay, which I just heard about this summer, and then Providence Bay is at a hotel. But yeah, there's some missing there. They need to get on top of that. I don't know if Chapleau was part of this, but nobody goes to Chapleau.
Well, again, it's good that we get another 270 sites added to the province of Ontario. You're right, there still are holes, and there will continue to be some holes. But this is going a long way to start plugging those holes and start addressing some of the redundancy that's required on at least the major highways that run north and south. So it's something that they can certainly grow upon and make better. I really hope that the province has implemented some sort of a maintenance that they're keeping track of how the uptime of these sites. And if there's reimbursement happening, that the province is weighing the reliability of the network as well. So we saw that was a problem in the early days of EVs, and hopefully we've learned our lesson going forward when there is subsidies involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maintains, keeps it going. Yeah, and then maybe also to that point. Maintains it and then keeps it, hopefully somewhat, it will help to expand the network. I'm not sure what they're going to charge, per hour to using these, but, hopefully it just keeps feeding more chargers put in on that.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, there you go.
Yeah, so if you have any interest in the articles that we quoted in today's podcast, you'll be able to see them in the notes below. So you'll be able to link to those at any time you want. If you haven't already, please give us a thumbs up on the video. We would really appreciate that. And if you haven't subscribed, press that subscribe button and you'll be notified next time we upload an episode immediately. So would really appreciate that as well. Let's move to shout outs. And Ian, have you got anything you would like to shout out besides your love of tacos?
Yeah, no kidding. I'm surprised tonight I actually didn't make tacos with Eric's sayings in Mexico and inspiration. Though I will say I had some lovely mezcal on Friday night and introduced a friend to it. Was all right. The shout out I would give to Tesla Kitchener. They let me this afternoon take out a Cybertruck for a test drive, and I got told I look like a midget beside it. The thing's huge, but the steering was really interesting with the steer by wire. That was a totally new experience, and with the tightness and with turning and understanding how this works. It was really cool. And of course, going in the expressway, and you could see some of the people's looks. They're becoming more known now in the public, but still you get a lot of people kind of like checking like what the. And of course, we're accelerating, and they put a limiter on us at 135 kilometers, unfortunately. But and to that point too, I took a friend out who had never been in an electric vehicle, and he was blown away. Because for him, it's like he hears about some of this stuff, and he calls me EV Ian. But it was, for him, it was a lot of fun. He loved the acceleration and looking at the truck, and I think we both agreed, like, looks aside, whether you like it or not, that is a truck that is still very practical and has some pretty amazing technology in it. That being said, so does the Ford, so does the GM, so does Rivian. Like, I mean, I think we got a good selection of trucks here, and they're all very similar in what they're doing with this. The only thing, the Cybertruck's got the output with the 240 and that, and I wish they would get that on all their vehicles, especially if you go camping. That's a feature that Ford's got it, GM's got it. I just wish they would do it on all the vehicles, because it's a nice thing to have for that. So, but yeah, you know what? It was fun. And the windshield wiper. Like I'm, the screen's not big enough for me to do this. I kind of made the joke that if I have a broken hockey stick, I'll put it in the back just as a backup to attach it to.
It's about the size of it, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much.
I was going to say, I don't think it's big enough.
It's like, there's no way in hell you're going to go to Canadian Tire and get that replaced unless you get about 3 of them and duct tape it on.
How would they put that thing on the shelf?
I know. Oh, yeah.
Exactly. Eric, any shout outs from you this evening?
So I've been shopping for winter tires for my Blazer EV, and it's actually been a little bit tricky, because when General Motors launched the Blazer EV and some of the other like the Cadillac Lyric and stuff like that, they came out with sort of a unique bolt and hub pattern for the wheels a little bit. And there are some wheels out there, but they're a little tricky to get a hold of right now. So, I worked with a group, Tirecraft in Stratford, who managed to hook me up with some wheels from Turin that will fit the Blazer EV, and I've got those on orders. And when I get back from Mexico, I'm supposed to be putting those winter tires on my Blazer. So, just a shout out to Tirecraft in Stratford. They had a good service and good people there that helped me get me hooked up. So.
Oh, very good. Well, with that, I think we will wrap it this evening. Again, thanks very much for being with us. Press that thumbs up, give us a hand. And with that said, we'll connect with you next time. And together, we'll find out what's happening in WREVA Electrifying News. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.